Joining me live now is human rights lawyer and fellow Jesuit priest, Father Frank Brennan, fellow with Pope Francis, and someone you met over the years. Father Frank, how will Pope Francis be remembered?
Morning, Kieran, and morning to your listeners. I think he'll be remembered as a pope who had a great pastoral touch. He had a fond saying he was sick of the clericalism of the church, where the clerics would give directions from on high and people would be expected to comply. Rather, he said he wanted the clergy to have the smell of the sheep and he wanted the church to be more like a field hospital. So I think he'll be remembered as one who saw the church as something much beyond Europe and as an institution which was able to reach out to the gross peripheries of our world and particularly touch and help the lives of those poorest and most marginalised.
Yeah, this is interesting, the peripheries of our world. And there was, having read many reports and eulogies about Pope Francis over the last 24 hours, there was one number that really stuck out at me, Father Frank, and that is that the conclave that will choose the next Pope represents 90 plus countries now, more than 90 countries represented by the cardinals that the Pope chose. When he was chosen, it was 50 countries represented.
Yes. And Kieran, it's not only the plurality of countries. I mean, if you look at Australia, for example, in the past it would always have been the Archbishop of Sydney or the Archbishop of Melbourne who would have been made a cardinal. This Pope had no interest in that. He did eventually appoint someone in Australia as a cardinal, a 44-year-old Redemptorist priest who was working with the Ukrainians. And so we're very proud to have him as, if you like, an Australian cardinal. But if you look around our immediate region, places like East Timor, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, New Zealand, they all have cardinals. And so he was very deliberately wanting to go to those peripheries, and his critics do have a case in saying that some of these cardinals would not have the same training in theology in the great European or Western schools of theology as other cardinals would have in previous times. So what's the cardinal from Mongolia, for example, going to contribute at the conclave? And it's that sort of mix which I think has created something truly exciting. And for those of us as Catholics, we believe that that's where the Holy Spirit does the work. So we'll wait and see the result.
We'll wait and see the result. And if you look at the result of the 12 years of Pope Francis, is it fair to say in broad terms, because there's so much detail we can get caught up in and the various, the governance of the church and the various elements of doctrine and so on, but just in broad terms, did he lead to what is now a more open Catholic Church?
Definitely, and he did it by leading by example. He said, look, we want more openness and more transparency. Think, for example, of a few things that he changed. In the past, a pope would make a visit overseas, he'd hold a press conference on the plane on the way home, but you'd have to give written questions. This pope said, I'm not interested in written questions, I'll answer any question that comes along. So there he was on the plane one night on the way back from Brazil, and he's asked about gay and lesbian rights. And he basically says, who am I to judge? Now, understandably, quite a number of conservative Catholic clerics said, what's going on here? But his thing was he wanted a church that was open to anybody and everybody. As he said in one of his notable sermons, we're not the church of the pure, which would be simply a small remnant. We are the church of sinners. We are open to everyone in the world. I want the church to be more like a field hospital, and I want you clergy out there with the smell of the sheep. So he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. And as we saw, his first pastoral visit out of Rome, go back to that, Kieran, it was to the island of Lampedusa. And that was the island where you had African asylum seekers trying to reach landfall in Europe. Now, he didn't go there saying, I've got the answers of some leftist agenda as to what should happen with migration or whatever, but he did want to send a wake-up call to the European leaders. And people like Angela Merkel then tried to do the thinking about that. So I think he saw himself as being the leader of a church which could take symbolic action and which could call all people of goodwill to reflect on what was necessary in terms of justice, mercy, forgiveness, and reconciliation.
Yeah, and so interesting the way that he diverged and departed from the approach of some of his predecessors. He copped, as you touched on politely, but I'd like you to elaborate, if you can, the flack that he copped, including from some anonymous scribes in Rome and some that we believe were pretty well placed within the Vatican, who criticised him very strongly. First of all, if you can reflect on that, and secondly, your own personal experience. As I mentioned, you did meet him a couple of times. Tell us what he was like, if you can answer both of those points for us.
Right. For more conservative Catholics, including those who are very senior in the Vatican, they had long taken the view that, of course, the Church needs to be a firm teacher on issues of moral doctrine, but at the same time, the Church needs to be very pastoral, very forgiving, and very understanding. But the unwritten code was that once you were something like an archbishop or a cardinal or a pope, you spoke publicly about those rules that had to be followed, but you didn't speak too publicly about the need for pastoral solicitude. You did that in private, and that's how the tension was held. Well, this fella came along and said, well, actually, I'm not all that interested in trying to develop doctrine or dogma. I'll leave that as it is, but I definitely want to be out there publicly enunciating and demonstrating that we are committed to pastoral solicitude for everybody and anybody. Now, that caused great upset. The next upset, Kieran, was when he instituted the idea of what he called synodality. Now, that's a foreign term for those outside of church circles. But basically, it was saying, look, the days of having a big meeting in Rome where you had serried ranks of clerics with pointy hats, where those with the purple hat sat at the back, those with the red hat sat at the front, and those with the white hat sat at the podium. He said, those days have gone. We've got to be able to sit at a round table, and God forbid, we'd even have women at the round table, but that we would have laity generally at the round table, and that we would start to discern together. Now, for a lot of the senior clerics in the Vatican, that was seen to be unstable in terms of trying to maintain the inherent capacity of the Church to simply be a rock through the ages. Whereas from his point of view, and it was his Jesuit training, it was that what we need to be able to do is to discern what the Spirit is asking of us, and we can only do that if we are attentive to everybody's interests. And as you say, yes, I did have the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times, and I saw his great personality. The first time I met him, I took him a bottle of the Jesuit Seven Hill wine from Clare Valley in South Australia. And there he was delighted, and he said, Aqua Sacra. And I was surrounded by young married couples, and there he was saying, Aqua Sacra, holy water. And then the next time I met him, I was able to present him with the book I did on the Indigenous voice, because he had spoken very eloquently about our need to respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. He was not for this idea of simply equating equality with sameness, that we had to look to the aspirations of the Indigenous people. And on that occasion, as one of your photos shows, I was in the company of a very fine Indigenous leader from the Northern Territory, Miriam Rose Ungamer. Well, there they both were, Miriam and the Pope in their wheelchairs. And there in their wheelchairs, with great humility and with great affection, they were able to greet each other. So, yes, it was a privilege for me to be able to meet a Pope of this sort.
Very special indeed. Father Frank, we appreciate your thoughts today on a momentous day for the Catholic Church, and there will be a big few weeks ahead, but a wonderful life and legacy that Pope has left.
Indeed. And may he rest in peace. And I don't think we need to be too despondent or downhearted, Kieran. I mean, I think he got his way. He died at Easter. He wanted to give that Easter message, and he wanted to show that he incarnated that Easter message. He believed in the resurrection. He believed in new life, and he wanted to put before the people, this is who I am. I'm ready to shuffle off the mortal coil, and I think there are better things ahead. So may he rest in peace.
Yeah, well said. Hard to top that, Father Frank. Thank you.